Our breaking news this morning, the British Prime Minister has suffered another crucial blow, failing to secure enough support to send the country to the polls. Boris Johnson moved a motion to hold a snap general election on October 15th. Even though only 56 MPs voted against it, the motion failed to gain the required two-thirds majority for it to pass. Mr Johnson has repeatedly denied wanting an early election, but changed his mind after failing to block legislation that was designed to thwart a no-deal Brexit. Now, the British leader is accusing Labor of running scared.
Mr Speaker, 48 hours ago, he was leading the chants of "Stop the coup, let the people vote." Now he's saying, "Stop the election and stop the people from voting." I think there's only one solution. I think he has become the first, to my knowledge, the first leader of the opposition in the democratic history of our country to refuse the invitation to an election, Mr Speaker. I can only speculate as to the reasons behind his hesitation. Mr Speaker, the obvious conclusion is, I'm afraid, that he does not think he will win.
Jeremy Corbyn has now become Britain's first opposition leader to block an election. He earlier indicated he didn't want to go to the polls unless a no-deal Brexit was completely taken off the table. Well, joining me now live from number 10 Downing Street in London is CNN reporter Nick Robertson. Nick, we're going to need your help understanding what's happened on this rather dramatic day of events in British Parliament. The election was on, then it was off again. Is it completely off?
It's off for now. The Prime Minister really is sort of using a very clear election tactic. He wants to fight the elections on the basis of it's people versus Parliament. His supporting the people. They voted to leave the European Union. The Parliament's blocking them. And now he's accusing Jeremy Corbyn, leader of the opposition, of blocking that process. And this is the way the campaign's going to be fought. That's real sort of conservative propaganda for you right there. And the Labour Party, for their part, have always said, yes, we'd like an election. We'll call a vote of no confidence in the government, but when we feel the moment is right for us. And what the leader of the opposition went on to say today, Jeremy Corbyn, in retort to Boris Johnson, said it would be a poisoned apple, likening it to that sort of Walt Disney situation with Snow White. A poisoned apple if we were to take that vote right now, because they don't trust the government. Jeremy Corbyn doesn't trust Boris Johnson to move the date of the election and to move the date beyond that hard Brexit deadline of the 31st of October. He wants, he said, to get the legislation locked in place that forces the Prime Minister to ask the European Union for an extension. Only then will the opposition commit itself to this general election. And in the meantime, the opposition has a huge advantage of making the Prime Minister look increasingly weak, because the Prime Minister doesn't have what he wants and is now saying is not negotiating with the European Union. He goes from looking like a strong Prime Minister to a weak one in the matter of barely 24 hours.
OK, Nick, I was going to ask you about that because a few people have said that Boris Johnson might have expected this. It might have been part of his plans. What's your view on that with what you've seen tonight and the sources that you're talking to?
Boris Johnson has always said that he was going to get Britain out of the European Union on the 31st of October, and he's rolled the dice on trying to achieve that. A do-or-die, no-deal Brexit. And he even threatened members of his own party, senior members, with deselection if they voted against the government. And he's actually acted through on that. Winston Churchill's grandson now thrown out of the party. The most venerable member of the House of Commons and the member of the Conservative Party, Ken Clarke, held so many top government positions, thrown out of the Conservative Party, other former cabinet members. So Boris Johnson has sort of put all his eggs in one basket on that, if you will. And this has been, in essence, a gamble, and it hasn't quite paid off. Yes, there were those that speculated that this was his intention going down this route, that if he didn't get what he wanted, he'd call the snap election. But he also would have known, because the opposition has been making their position very clear, that they wouldn't jump in and support him. So he would have gamed that out, and he would also know that he will be able to maintain the rhetoric now of the people versus Parliament, that he is supporting the people and it's the opposition that's blocking the will of the people. So this fits his campaign narrative perfectly, and we're going to hear more of that over the coming weeks once it becomes clear when the general election will be, because there is going to be one. That seems inescapable now.
OK, so I was about to ask you where are we at now and what happens from now? I mean, is there more back and forth until that election comes? So what's your view of the next days and the next weeks?
Well, there's a couple of important things on this legislation to force the Prime Minister to, to roll back on the no-deal Brexit and to go and ask for an extension. Part of that is it's passed in the House of Commons, but it's going through the House of Lords right now for a reading there, and it's potentially going to be filibustered. There are more than 90 amendments that are being proposed by Conservative peers. So they have the ability to basically talk out this legislation. So it may not ultimately go through, although the expectation at the moment is that it will. But outside of that, I think the Prime Minister begins to potentially look weaker, and is going to be in a position where the opposition is going to be able to essentially pressure him to meet their demands, because the only way out of the impasse for the Prime Minister will be to get the general election, and the only way to get the general election is to do what the opposition is asking, even though today he refused to do that. Now, does the Prime Minister have another legislative trick up his sleeve, some way to bypass the Fixed-Term Parliament Act so that he only needs a simple majority in Parliament to win the vote to have the general election? Is there a mechanism, a rabbit on that one, that is going to pull out of the hat? I think none of us quite know that at the moment. But we're certainly, and I think we continue to say this, we're in a very, very difficult and uncharted period of British politics. Everything over the past 24 hours has been laid out. All the deep divisions have come to the surface in Parliament. They've been talked about back and forth. But the practicalities of where we go next, I think that some of that remains unclear.